Wendy Clark on her small dairy farm in Patumahoe, south of Auckland. The summer here has been tough, like in most places, and Wendy has already dried off all of her herd.
Financially, it hasn't gone well at all. We'll lose money because of the drought. So production hasn't been too bad, but the payout is the real killer. And in relative terms, this payout would be as bad as I can ever remember in 31 years. So in the old days, $4.70 would have been a great payout, but our costs were a lot lower. And I remember in times gone by where you only got a $3 payout, but your costs were only $1. Now, the costs are actually more than the payout.
Through your involvement in things like discussion groups, do you think the pain's being felt across the board?
Yes, it has. So I haven't met anyone who is boasting that he's going to make any money. A lot of the guys will just have bigger overdrafts. And it's really the focus is on minimising the loss rather than maximising the profit.
And what techniques are being used to help with that?
Well, we always expect a dry season, so we plant turnips and quite often we'll plant chicory as well. And we also buy in palm kernel to help us bridge the gap. But if we can't see that we're going to bridge the gap quickly enough before the end of the season, then we pull the plug, and that's what we've done already, so that we've dried off.
The summer drought affected everyone, and any rainfall helped.
2 weeks?
Yep, we had 35 mils about a week ago, and we had 12 mils overnight, and basically the farm is responding overnight to any rain that we get.
And so looking forward, so you're due to start calving in a couple of months. How are the cows looking?
They need to put condition on, yeah, but they'll be ready by next July.
And do you use any irrigation here on the farm?
No, we don't, because that's not really cost effective for us. We would have to dig a very deep bore. We don't have access to a substantial stream. And yeah, it's just not an option for us.
Wendy's farm is part of the Auckland Council catchment. In fact, over 80% of the Greater Auckland area is rural. There are currently 290 dairy farmers in the region, and people say they generally have a good relationship with the council. But many of the farms belong to an ageing population, and with land values soaring, the future for local farmers on small blocks is uncertain.
When we sell the farm, it's most unlikely that anyone will buy it as a dairy farm, unless it was the neighbours and they would buy it for their own reasons. The land is really highly priced per hectare. It might suit a land banker because of its proximity to a designated growth area, which is Patumahoe. But in the meantime, he would probably lease it out to some dairy farmer as a runoff. Alternatively, it could be used for something like dairy goat farming, which gives a much better return per hectare. So the size of the farm isn't such a limitation as it would be to a dairy farmer.
What would you like to see happen to it?
I'd like to see somebody like a dairy goat farmer take it over. When you've put your life's work into the land, you don't really want to see it cut up for houses, do you?
While the long-term future is unknown, but Wendy still advocates for farmers in her role as Auckland Provincial President of Federated Farmers. I asked her what she thought about the proposed new health and safety regulations and how it could impact on farmers.
What we do know is that farmers and any other business are going to be responsible not only for their own employees, but they're going to have a shared responsibility for any employees that are employed by contractors. A contractor can be anyone who's self-employed. It can be your 50-50 share milker or the contract milker like we have. It can be the guy who comes on to harvest your supplements, or it could be the guy that comes on to harvest your pine trees. And generally, small farms use contractors a lot. They use it for the labour, for the machinery and for their expertise. With the change in regulation, they will be responsible for the health and safety of people doing a job that they may not have any expertise in. It affects all farmers, but small farmers have to do everything themselves, and there's a lot more reporting. And so more of their time will be taken away from the practical jobs around the farm to keeping the documentation going. And so for a small farmer, that's quite a compliance cost and quite a physical burden for them. I actually think health and safety is going to be a really big challenge. Agriculture has the highest accident rate now. That's because the other even more dangerous industries have already lifted their game. And what we don't know about the legislation is how it's going to be interpreted by WorkSafe. And it will just depend whether or not they're going to take a practical view or whether they're going to expect farmers to be documenting every single thing that they do. So we already have to, if we have a chat, my contractor Milka and I, about just a casual thing about the job that's to be done and how to be safe, we then have to go away and actually write down the conversation as well. So that kind of doubles the work surrounding it.
I asked Wendy why she continues to be involved in Fed Farmers.
Because I don't want to let down people, and because in the past, before we started farming, other people did really amazing things to make sure that we inherited a viable industry. And so I think everybody needs to do their bit to make sure that the next generation has a sustainable industry to go into. So the work that we do today isn't really about what happens on this farm. It's about making sure that there is a good industry for the young ones that are coming up.
Wendy lived her childhood dream of becoming a cowboy and continues to think forward, even as a regular on country TV. It seems fitting to end this week's show with Wendy's monthly TV report.
Federated farmers, and I imagine a lot of other people as well, have been excluded from significant portions of the upcoming mediation.
Well, if you're not satisfied with what they put in place at the end of the day, will you appeal this issue to the Environment Court? What can you do?
Under the special Auckland legislation, there are no appeals to the Environment Court on merit. So you can only appeal on points of law, and that gets dealt with by the High Court. I would say if Council have failed to adequately consult, if they have failed to provide the appropriate methodology, if they have failed to provide evidence for the inclusion of these sites, then it's highly possible that they're not going to have met their legal requirements. And if that's the case, the people of Auckland will be able to appeal, and Federated Farmers most likely will join that appeal.
Hello and welcome to Thinking Forward. As our dairy industry grows, so do the farms. Syndicates, overseas businesses and joint family ventures are continuing to supersize dairy farms, bringing supersized challenges as well as profits. This week we're taking a look at the boutique end of the industry and are on a small dairy farm in Patumahoe, owned and operated by Wendy Clark. Wendy, would you describe your farm as boutique?
If boutique means small, then yes, I do describe it like that. It's 42 effective hectares, and we carve down 125 cows, and we graze away all our young stock. We have a couple of runoffs, and so the farm itself is just a milking platform.
Are they leased runoffs or owned runoffs?
Yeah, no, we lease them.
Okay.
The herd itself is a crossbred herd, so we cross backwards and forwards between Frisian and Jersey for the hybrid vigour. Start calving on the 1st of July. The land's quite heavy soil without being a clay soil, and it's rolling without any flat paddocks, basically. What I think of as a flat paddock actually is not.
Wendy and her husband Norm have lived here for 27 years. She runs the farm with the help of a manager, although Norm pitches in with his dairying background and an off-farm income, both of which have been a great help over the years. Norm, you grew up on a dairy farm. What did you think when Wendy said she wanted to become a farmer?
Well, I was a bit surprised, but I was okay with it because as long as she was prepared to do it, because I had my own job and we were looking at buying a lifestyle plot, and to upgrade to a dairy farm was about twice the price, but then you had an income. So economically it seemed to make sense to me.
I'd always wanted to farm. I'd wanted to teach as well, but I had a list of things I wanted to do before I died. And I was pregnant, planning to be a stay-at-home mum, and it was just an opportune moment to change careers. It turned out to be a bit more challenging than I had imagined.
The farm had to be near to Norm's work at the Glenbrook Steel Mill, which restricted their choices when looking for land to buy.
We looked for a year and only 2 properties in this area came up. And this was the smaller of the 2. The other one was up the Ep10 Peninsula, and it was a tougher farm. It was less likely to be able to attract labour because of its distance from, it was more remote. This one was close to Auckland, so that might be good for your employee's wife to work off farm. And we thought that it could produce as much as the larger farm up the Ep10 Peninsula. So given we only had 2 choices, after a year we decided to buy it, even though it wasn't the ideal size.
The original plan was to have a share milker, but Wendy and Norm soon realised that that wouldn't be sustainable, so they were faced with buying their own herd.
So when the share milker moved on, we bought part of his herd. We should have bought the whole herd, but we didn't have the money. So we made a deal with Norm's brothers, and they sold us their culls on very favourable repayment terms, which was you can pay us back when you've got the money. So we inherited all these aged, low-producing, high somatic cell count cows, which gave us no end of problems and stress, and we formed a very close relationship with the vet.
The young couple moved a relocatable house onto the land and started living there full-time. Norm's off-farm income helped finance that, as well as necessary upgrades and the usual farm maintenance like fencing, drainage and water supply.
As a young married mum with a husband who was often away with his job, Wendy just had to work things out for herself. Here is a typical description of how it was for her from an article Wendy wrote recently.
Okay, take a weekend in 1988, for example. The manager was on leave, Norm in Australia on business. I was 7 months pregnant with our 3rd. Did I employ a relief milker? No. I got up at 4 a.m, checked the calves, milked the herd, tussled with the heifers, dealt with mastitis, cleaned up, fed the calves, and stumbled home at 11 a.m. for breakfast. I didn't shut away the herd because we didn't have a bike and I was too tired to walk to the back of the farm. But as I sat down to eat, I spotted a cow staggering home to the cow shed for help. She died of bloat at the bottom of the gully. 500 kilos of carcass had to be removed from the main race before the afternoon milking. A neighbour dragged her out of the way with chains and a tractor. "You better feed out some hay or you'll have more of these," he said. That evening, I finished work at 10 o'clock and set the alarm for 3 o'clock so that I could make it through Sunday. My swollen stomach felt as if someone had constricted it with steel bands. Norm flew home on Monday night. "How was the weekend?" he asked. "Okay," I said. My foolhardiness was breathtaking.
Farmers are famously a stoic bunch and often don't talk much about problems or challenges. Wendy found joining a local discussion group really helpful.
There was one particularly wet winter when I was, quite inexperienced, and I was just watching the cows day by day systematically destroy the farm, paddock by paddock. It was calving time and it just rained every day, and nobody wanted discussion group at their place because nobody wanted anyone else to see what was going on their farms. So we had it here. And when we got to the top of the ridge and looked down over my blackened farm, somebody said, "Now I feel at home." And we went back to the barn, and we could barely hear each other talk because the rain was beating down on the tin roof. And we discussed solutions. From that discussion group, I came away with a raft of techniques, which we still use today, so that winters are much less frightening. And up until that particular discussion group, I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping. I didn't want to talk to anyone unless he was a farmer. But that night after discussion group, I slept for the first time because I came away with a plan. So it still wasn't an easy winter, but at least I had some ways of attacking the problem.
Wendy has gained a lifetime of experience steering her small block. But what does the future hold? We'll find out later in the show. But next, let's hear what our experts say about boutique farms.
This week we hear from David Irving, founder of the Ice House. I asked him how he thought Wendy and Norm had made their small dairy farm viable.
Well, they really wanted it to work. You've got something that's on the face of it, it's not going to generate enough money to be a viable business. The amount of milk you're going to produce is just not going to pay all of the costs that you've got in the ownership of that business. You've got a circumstance where, well, you're going to have to think outside the square. You know, if you really want this, well, what are you going to do? And you look into your own resources and you say, well, what am I good at? And in her case, she clearly was good at running the farm. That's who she was, that's what she was able to do. In the husband's case, in Norm's case, what else could he do? And he had other capabilities. He knew the farming business well, but he could use his other capabilities to find other work. And it wasn't just, you know, an average job, he was able to get quite a good job away from the farm. He mightn't have wanted to do that, but he was nevertheless using the capabilities that they jointly had to overcome the issue that they weren't generating enough money from the farm to really be able to survive. So his actual role is terribly important. The alternative stream of a reliable salary, not a commission, but a reliable salary versus the dairy farm where proceeds can be up and down according to price, and they've got a debt to cover, and so they needed reliable money. He created reliable money. It came in every week. It was from a good employer. There was no question of that employer suddenly not being there, and it really actually served to build up the equity in the business. It starts to, as we know, build the shareholder funds, the size of the owner's interest in their own business, more than the bank's interest in the business. So that reliable earnings and cash flow has served them so well, and it would get to a point, I would have thought, where the need for that amount of it would become less because the equity base would be sufficient and it would be sustainable without so much outside income. So that's one side of what your question, I think, poses, you know, and that answer is about how can we use the best skills of the two people. But your question also implied that this is a boutique. This is small, and small, sometimes people think of niche, and when they think of niche, they think of boutique. So when you think boutique, you're now thinking premium products, not mainstream products. And what they're doing at the moment is they sell their milk to Fonterra. Fonterra is a mainstream producer. It's not a boutique producer. So they've got a boutique-sized supplier to a very large commodity producer. Maybe that fit could be improved if they were, for instance, to say, take the learning of our more recent Lewis Road chocolate milk. Now look at that. So let's just imagine in cheese that the same sort of thing could be done. And there were, in the New Zealand market, let's say, we hadn't exploited some premium cheese product opportunities. Peter Cullinane, who was the man behind the Lewis Road, he had just looked and said, why aren't New Zealand marketing top quality butter? And he came out with this Lewis Road butter. Then why not chocolate milk? And why not link in with Whittaker's, who is a New Zealand chocolate producer, a brand that's well liked. Put it on the bottle. So now you've got this new Lewis Road, and you've got really endorsed by Whittaker's brand of chocolate. Now, find a way in the dairy products with your little 110-acre farm to link in with a milk processor, a cheese processor, and use your own brand of your name of your farm, get an identity that, just as Peter Cullinane has for Lewis Road, and go register it. That's the name we're going to go under. And look to produce, be the supplier to a dairy company who will produce a product for you that you now go and market. Now, the marketing will go, you go to the Clevedon market on Saturday mornings and people get to see it. Chefs go out there to see new products that aren't available in a supermarket. You look for opportunities for the public to see your product. If you see the strong uptake, then now you've got to start thinking of how do you gear up for that. And that would be a question beyond potentially the 110-acre block that you've got. But you could always keep it under, you can keep the supply down. Keep the supply down, price goes up. So it's scarcity value almost that you're looking to create. Now, Peter Cullinane could have kept it right down here and people would say, God, I've got to have it, and they'll just pay for it, whatever. They don't even see the dollars go out of their pocket. He's now looking to really meet the demand. As he meets the demand, it'll plateau out and price will settle down probably. Others will come into that market and try to replicate it. But if our friends in our 110-acre block, if they keep it down in a scarcity value, then they will get the premium price for it. Just what a boutique would do. So that's examples of how do you now make money? How do you survive and then make money out of a block on the face of it that's too small? And the traditional farmer would say, you've got to be 150 acres, you've got to be 200, you've got to have 500 cattle, whatever that sort of break-even point for a dairy farm logic says you should have. If you're going to go under that number because you haven't got the size, then you need to first of all survive, as they did, and then secondly, how can I exploit it? And by the way, their farm is in a rural area at the moment, but it's very close to the town and the residential development. So they're sitting on more value with that capital value than most dairy farmers would likely be sitting on.